welcome to TV30, the program where we shed light on the stories and issues that shape St. Lucia. I'm Desir. As we celebrate the Nobel Laureate Festival under the theme Celebrating Excellence, honouring our legacy, shaping our tomorrow, we're joined by a guest who has a deep commitment to sharing Caribbean voices. Polly Patullo is a former editor, a journalist, an author, and she's the founder of Papillot Press. She's presently in St. Lucia to launch the book Renewal, Poems by Irvin Desir. It's a remarkable book, and Irvin Desir was highly regarded by our St. Lucian Nobel laureate, Sir Derek Walcott. We're going to talk about the book a little later. Welcome to TV30 and once again to St. Lucia, Polly.
Thank you very much. It's been some years since I've been here and I'm delighted to come in this very auspicious week that you're having to celebrate your two laureates.
Yes, and I know that you're here to launch the book by Irvin Desir, and I said we're going to be talking about that later, and I'm very excited to do that. And also you've got a copy of the book, so please stay tuned. We're going to be talking a lot about the book a little later, but first let's talk about the beginnings of Papillot Press. It's a very fundamental, very important publishing company for the Caribbean. You're based in London and Dominica. You're here in St. Lucia, but what actually inspired you to start Papillot Press, and how has that initial idea evolved?
Well, it evolved is probably quite a good word because there was no big strategic plan. It emerged out of self-publishing, a self-publishing venture, when I wanted to write a book about the gardens of Dominica, and I realized that this is a very niche subject. I am also not a celebrity, therefore not likely to be taken up by some publishing company in the UK or indeed anywhere else. So I thought, well, this is an opportunity to self-publish. This was I suppose in a way, although self-publishing stretches back into many centuries, but this was an opportunity to develop my skills. I designed it myself, which was probably a terrible mistake because I'm not a designer. But I put it together with a friend of mine who was the expert, Anne Jean-Baptiste of the Papillot Wilderness Retreat in Dominica, which is where the name comes from, and she's a great gardener. So we put it together, we published it, and I realized that, oh, I can do this. So I looked around and I felt that I could publish other books by Dominican writers, not by myself, but by Dominican writers. So that's how it sort of emerged out of the primeval slime, as it were, of my ideas and expertise.
And how did it develop?
Well, after that, after the self-publishing, realizing that, oh, I could do this, I was approached by someone who had a manuscript of short stories, and she asked me if I could publish it. So there was no big plan, and I thought, as I said, well, I've self-published a book already. I sort of understand the mechanics of it. So I thought, well, let's give it a go. But I never really thought that it would go any further.
Has the landscape for small publishers changed within the Caribbean? And also, do you ever come up against writers saying, why would I want to be published by a Caribbean publisher? I want to be published worldwide?
Well, there are two questions, really. Being published worldwide, of course, a lot of writers do instinctively from the Caribbean want to be published by the big boys and girls in America and the UK or wherever. But I think sometimes people also like to feel that they can be published by somebody who, although I'm not from the Caribbean or of the Caribbean, but I've spent many years here now, so I understand a little bit about how it works. So I think that that's really what I would say, that they might come to me because they think that I have a certain empathy with the Caribbean, rather than going to the big houses where, first of all, they probably don't have so much of an opportunity to get taken on, than if they come to a smaller publishing house who maybe understands their concerns and background.
And of course, because you are a publisher, it does not mean that you're going to publish anything that comes to you.
Oh gosh, no, absolutely not, because the model of publishing that I've adopted is the traditional one, in which the publisher pays for the whole publication. I mean, sometimes I do get a little bit of help here and there, but mainly I am the person who finances it, rather than the other model, which is now more common, of self-publishing, in which you pay a publisher for publishing your book. So I have a very, I think, and I hope, a strong criteria in what I take on and what I don't. And of course, because I'm so tiny, I can only take on, 1 or 2 books a year. Yes.
Tell us some of the writers you've worked with, some of the publications that have come out of Papillon Press.
Well, first of all, I started with just for books from Dominica and about Dominica. So the first book that I published was It Falls Into Place, which are the short stories of Phyllis Shandolfrey. Now she died in 1986, but she was actually the reason I first went to Dominica in the first place, because she had written a novel that's become a sort of Caribbean classic in the 1950s called The Orchid House. And The Orchid House was a sort of autobiographical story about her family, the white family of the plantocracy who'd fallen on hard times, and that was sort of her background. She'd written this book, and it had been quite a success in the 1950s, but then she'd become a politician. She always said, politics ruined me for writing. And she lived in the UK, and then she went home to start the Dominica Labour Party. She was co-founder of it. And so there were 2 strands of her life that I was interested in. One was her politics and one was her writing. So I was delighted that she'd published this book, and I went to interview her when it was reissued. So I then wanted to write, to publish her short stories, and those were the stories that somebody had offered me. So I was really delighted to be able to start. So that was the first book that came my way, as it were. As I say, it's not a strategic thinking, it's quite impulsive in a way, what I do and what I take on. And that was the first book. So there were then quite a few Dominican books. And then there was a wonderful competition for young adult writers that came out of the Trinidadian Literary Festival, Bocas. And this competition was for Caribbean writers. And the winners then got to choose a publisher from the Caribbean who would publish their book, and then those books would be distributed to schools and libraries in the Caribbean. So everybody won in a Caribbean context: the writers, the publishers, and the readers. And this is the famous sort of triangle of publishing. You need all those people. And so out of that came a book by Diana McCauley, the Jamaican writer, called Gone to Drift. And then there was a book by a Puerto Rican Cuban writer called The Art of White Roses. And then there was a book by a Trinidadian writer, Lisa Allen Agostini, called Home Home, which was about mental health, which was and young people. So there were all those were in, I then spread my wings a little bit more into the Caribbean region, as it were, and realized that maybe there were people out there who would like to be published by me.
And of course, you've published our very own Robert Lee and MacDonald Dixon. How did that happen?
Oh, that happened, I think, because Robert Lee got in touch with me, and I'd met him, and I was delighted indeed to represent, to broaden my brief out to St. Lucia, and with Robert Lee's book about St. Lucia writers and writing, which is a very wonderful bibliography, as you would know, and of St. Lucian writers and writing. Very, very, very comprehensive, and it just shows how much literature comes out of small islands like St. Lucia or Dominica, or indeed, I mean, it is really quite extraordinary. And last night at the laureate lecture, somebody was saying there were 45 writers from St. Lucia being promoted at an event here next week. I think it is the book fair. And then MacDonald Dixon, who wrote a very good crime novel, and I think crime is an area in which more Caribbean writers, there's not been very much in that genre, which is interesting, and MacDonald Dixon's book, A Scream in the Shadows, is very much based in St. Lucian culture and rural life, and he speaks to that themes very well, and I was interested to be able to take that one up. Yes.
In modern times now, we don't just have the paper book where we can physically hold it. Of course, there are different places we can go online to purchase books, to read books. In the Caribbean, and particularly in St. Lucia, we do not have bookshops that we can literally go in. There aren't many that we can go in. What are your thoughts on having physical bookshops in the Caribbean? Of course, it would help your cause. Why do you think that there seems to be a decline in bookshops in the Caribbean?
I know. It's very concerning. Not everywhere. There are some, for example, in Trinidad, has a wonderful bookshop, but that is very much sort of promoted, I feel, by the fact that they have an excellent literary festival, and they both sort of feed into each other in a symbiotic way. But many of the other islands certainly struggle, and I sort of have a feeling that there could be a way in which you could have a bookshop, a cafe, an art centre, so that there's a sort of vibrancy about it, and all those interests feed off each other.
Well, I think that I remember growing up in St. Lucia, there were times when, when you go back to school, of course, you're just looking at your school books. But I was always looking at the shelves to find other books. And there weren't many at the time St. Lucian writers that were at the forefront of our education in books. There were Caribbean books because it was part of the curriculum, but I don't think there was as much emphasis. With Papillon Press, are you solely thinking about the Caribbean voice? Or do you think that you're going to be looking at anything else?
Well, I think there's so much richness that comes out of the Caribbean. There are so many, not as it were opportunities, but so much potential for writers here, coming from here, that I'm so small that I don't think that there would be, I could be here for a century and still the stories would be coming. So I don't feel the need to look beyond the Caribbean, for sure.
Thank you, Polly. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Renewal, poems by Irvin Desir. Stay with us.
La vie m'a changé juste comme ça. Avec même bagay lan, ça arrive.
Moving around could be a challenge for persons with disabilities, but there is some good news.
Yes,
All banks in Castries have ramps for accessibility.
Moi, pour une compagnie business qui a fait une différence.
True, but for years, I had difficulties getting into Parliament.
No ramps.
No ramps, no lift.
Same for the Central Library, and this must change.
Cox, pas Castries seulement.
Canawi, Soufouye, Vieux-Fort, Mikou, Rosile, place qu'on laisse la way, Exoiseille.
EQUIP, the Education Quality Improvement Project, ensuring new schools under the project have wheelchair access and facilities for persons with disabilities. This is a message from EQUIP, the Ministry of Education and the Caribbean Development Bank.
Welcome back. This is TV30. I'm Desir, and with me I have Polly Portolo, and we're talking about Caribbean publishing. And of course, as I mentioned, we are now going to talk about Irvin Desir. Polly, what encouraged you, what inspired you to actually publish this book of poems?
Well, once again, it was St. Lucia's Robert Lee who came to me, and he said that he had, there was this unknown, even to many St. Lucians, and certainly to me, poet who had recently died, and that his work had not been widely recognised, although it had been much admired by Derek Walcott and other writers. And would I be interested? And of course, I'm always open to people, especially people I know and respect, who will have ideas. And so I said, yeah, okay, send it and let's have a look. And so that's how it happened, yes.
And you have a copy of the book?
Yes, I do. It's a beautiful cover that's adapted by an original drawing when I think it was planned some years ago to publish his writings, but it never sort of happened. So we adapted this cover and this image for Renewal.
All right. And tell us about the book.
It's a collection of poetry. It's a slim volume, as they say, and when I first saw the poems, I thought this is something very special. I mean, many people write poems, and many people send me their work. But when I saw this, I thought this is really something exceptional. It's almost sort of mystical, but it's not. It's sort of spiritual, but it's not a sort of formally religious. It's not exactly about St. Lucia. It's never St. Lucia's not name, but it has very much a sort of sense of the place, I feel, sort of timeless. And I'm just very engaged and sort of entranced by these poems, really.
Would you mind reading the back of the
yes,
book to entice
I thought in a good way of describing it was that there are two writers who I asked to say something about it. One is Canisia Lubrin, who, as you know, is your famous St. Lucian poet and fiction writer, and recent winner of a major prize in Canada, and she was here.
Another St. Lucian from
exactly,
Bracknell, yes.
Exactly. Anyhow, what she said is, Renewal is poetry of rare gifts. It unfurls as hymn and closes as folklore, both personal and transcendent. Desir's diamantine lines, marked with the sensual largesse of nature and the surreal, extend the poetry of a St. Lucian, belonging at once to no one and everyone, one of shades and shadows. So that was her take on the poems. And then I asked Alison Donnell, who I've also published her work, which was about lost Caribbean writers. And in a way, Irvin Desir fits that description because he was so unknown. And her book is called Lost and Found, an A to Z of neglected writers of the Anglophone Caribbean. And what she says, she's a British academic, what she said, is bringing Irvin Desir's poetry back into light is like revealing a hidden gem that never knew its own brilliance. This edition is a great service to St. Lucian literary history. Well, that's both of those little quotes.
Is there an introduction in the book about who Irvin Desir was?
Yes, I asked Vladimir Lucian, another well-known and important St. Lucian writer, to write an introduction. And then at the end, there are 3 additional contributions by Desir's niece, by Robert Lee, and by Kendall Hippolyte. And piecing together the bits of his life are quite
Would you
complex.
mind telling us a little bit of that in terms of who he was, Irvin Desir?
About who he was?
Yes.
Yes, well, he was born, what we know, he was born in Castries in 1954. He was the 4th of 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls. He was educated at St. Aloysius RC Boys School and St. Mary's College. He spent time in Barbados and in Martinique, and he died here in September 2024. So that's, I mean, those are very sort of bare bones.
Yes.
He was not well known here. I feel that he was possibly a bit of a recluse. He lived in the countryside, I understand. He didn't come to Castries very often. And so he wrote, and then maybe he stopped writing. And so there was a sort of pathos, I feel, about his life, but his work is brilliant and sparkling, and yes.
Just by the way you're describing it, it makes me feel that, I know you've published several books. Are there any particular books or authors that have just made you think differently about the content or what you thought was going to be presented to you? Something that maybe particularly you think, oh, that's actually quite interesting or different?
Well, all my books are like that. You know, I'm very proud of all my books. There was one that I was interested because I was very much involved in the whole sort of process of it. It was like a teamwork, really. It's a book called Still Standing, the Tikai of Dominica, and the vernacular architecture. And we did illustrations, photographs, and I went round and we tried to explore where these little houses were, why they were still standing, why they'd survived the hurricane, what their owners found intriguing and interesting about living in such homes. And I went and we did our research with the photographer, the writer, students from the college came, architectural students. So there was this big collaboration, and I feel that's a really important and engaging part of the publishing process that more publishers maybe should become involved with, if they have time, of course, yes.
So let's look to the future. What do you see as the future of Papillon Press? And also, when we think of writers, how would you encourage writers to approach Papillon Press?
Well, I'm very happy on the website. There's the email, and I'm very happy for anybody to come to send some of their work. There's a lot of information out there about how to submit your work to any publisher. You know, you want to be very important about how you focus your submission, but if you do that, that will be fine. In terms of the future, who knows? All I know is that in March I'm publishing another collection of poetry by somebody completely different, who was born in Dominica but educated in Martinique and France, and and this is the first time his work has been translated into English, and he was very much passionate about nature, the natural world and the environment. He died in 1950, so he has another different story This is one of the many thousands of stories that the Caribbean can offer people, and we can rediscover.
Where do you see Caribbean writers going in the future? I know like 20 years ago, to me, I did not see as many Caribbean writers on international bookshelves. Now I see many of them.
I know. Well, they've come. I mean, now the Caribbean literature is really in the ascendant. It's in a very, very powerful position. But the weakness is that people have to go away still to be published, and the Caribbean identity needs to be retained within the region, I feel, as well as outside.
And we did touch on this a little bit earlier, but I just want to come back on this again. There are advantages of publishing in the Caribbean. When you publish a book in the Caribbean, and correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't mean that it just has to stay here, does it?
No, there is a sort of worldwide distribution network. So, and of course now with new technology, communications are much better. We're better informed about everything, I guess, despite all whatever else is going around. We're here and we're trying to do best for the Caribbean.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us here. And we wish you all the best with all your publications, and of course particularly our wonderful book, Renewal, by Irvin Desir.
Well,
where can people purchase the book?
This is going out after but I'm sure that Robert Lee will have copies, and it will be available here and in the UK. And in America and in the rest of the Caribbean, I hope.
And the Papillon Press website.
Yes, indeed.
Good.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Polly. Please continue to be the champion, the publishing champion for the Caribbean.
Thank you. I'll do my best.
Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you for staying with us. To have a pleasant day, evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Desir. Goodbye.